So this is Jared Bartzak.
Yep, Jared Bartzak.
And he's an IT auditor manager. He's got 5 years of compliance experience, multiple certifications, multiple compliance regimes. He's a subject matter expert on a couple of different areas, including AI. And he's helping with AI governance and compliance initiatives. And he had something for the World Government Organization, which I'm sure he'll talk about.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, so for this presentation, what I wanted to do is keep it pretty late since it's towards the end of the day. Thank you all for staying, first of all. And just really wanted to hit the high level of what is an IT auditor, what do we do, what's our day-to-day, because there's lots of misconceptions into what we do. A lot of people think, auditor, you're the bad guy, you're the one yelling at me, you're the one making me do all these things, tons of emails, right? There's lots of things that people think when they hear the word. So really just wanted to hit the high level, what we do, why you shouldn't be scared of us, and take it from there. And I like to keep these pretty informal, so please, any questions throughout, cut me off and ask me anything. Would rather you learn than me just lab all the time up here. All right, so I'm an IT audit manager for AI and special projects at Advanced Partners, but have been in the space my whole career. I've been in external IT audit, and I have conducted audits across many frameworks, such as SOC 2, the ISOs, HITRUST, CMMC, and most recently AI compliance with all the new frameworks coming out because of the UAI Act, South Korea AI Basic Act, all these governance laws forcing organizations to start enacting some frameworks to prove they're meeting these standards. As an IT auditor, I have a lot of the same credentials you'll see in the cybersecurity space, right? So I have CISSP, a very common cybersecurity credential. The CISO, which is a Certified Information System Auditor, an audit-specific credential. AAIA, ISAC's new AI audit credential. A couple HITRUST-specific ones in there that you will probably hear for the first and last time today, unless you're really interested in HITRUST. And outside of work, love soccer. Happy that the World Cup is coming up. I've been a player, coach, fan throughout my whole life. And beginning my entrepreneurial journey. So outside of cybersecurity, trying to start my own little side project here, build something out of it, and been using a lot of Claude code to try to build web applications and stuff. So really early on in it, having a lot of fun with it though. So. All right, so what does an IT auditor actually do? So there are a lot of these misconceptions, right? Number one, you're a hacker. No, I am not that smart. I can't hack into your systems. I can't do all that stuff. I don't pen tests. I can't red team. Do not like coding. So that is the first misconception, right? Then your firm. You work for a CPA firm. In order to conduct IT audits for SOC 2 and the 8, you have to be with the AICPA. You have to have CPAs as part of your board. So you're an accountant, you know numbers, you know how to do all this financial stuff. Nope, don't know how to do any of that at all. Then you must fix computers. You must be IT support, you must know everything about computers, everything why they're going wrong. Nope, once again, I have done that in my career, but not at this point. I'm not fixing computers, I'm not the help desk anymore. We evaluate, we don't operate, right? So as an IT auditor, reality, we independently check whether controls an organization claim to have are real, well-designed, and actually working. So I really like that definition. That seems to, at a high level cover what we do. So an organization says they're doing something, we're going in, checking that they're actually doing that, it's well-designed, and actually, once again, working. And then issue a report at the end to verify that. So what an IT audit actually is, it's an independent, evidence-based evaluation of whether an organization's controls over its technology and data are designed properly and operating as intended. So those are the two sort of paths there. One, that's designed properly. You have policies in place. You have all these governance into what you're doing. and then it is actually operating. Once again, you can provide that evidence. You can show us configurations. You can show us policies. You can show us all these things, and it's actually operating to say the way you wrote it out, right? So number one, independence is the big thing in IT auditing, right? We can't run the systems. We can't, implement anything into the systems we're checking. We have to be completely independent from the systems we're auditing, because you can't be building the stuff that you're going in and checking and signing off and saying, yeah, this is all okay because I did it all. No, we have to be objective and independent from what we are auditing. It is evidence-based, right? So opinions don't count. We're checking configurations, we're checking logs, tickets, records, policies, things like that. Sure, we might, conduct walkthroughs, talk with engineers, talk with HR individuals, talk with security individuals as well, just to get an overall view of what the systems are doing. But in the end, we need to actually see what it is doing, not just take your word for it, right? So that's another big pillar. And lastly, it's risk focused. So we evaluate risk across all these frameworks. We take deeper dives into stuff that is more risky than stuff that is less risky, right? So that all comes into play within the different audit frameworks as well. So once again, the auditor's question, show me the evidence that the control works, not just that you say it does. All right, now breakdown of what it is and what it isn't. So some of this we already covered, but we'll run through this again, right? So IT audit is not penetration testing or hacking. The security team that builds and runs controls. It is not IT support fixing laptops. It is not a gotcha exercise designed to catch people out, although a lot of my clients would argue otherwise, that we're just trying to pick up apart everything they built. And it is not a guarantee that nothing will ever go wrong. That's a big one. A lot of clients will get an audit saying, okay, now we're perfect. We have this piece of paper that says all these controls are working perfectly. Nah. There are still chances that things will go wrong. We take samples of stuff. We're not looking at the whole big picture, right? So there are still chances that things will go wrong. So what IT audit is, an independent second set of eyes. So once again, someone else saying you're doing things right, not just your own organization saying you're doing things right. A structured test of whether controls work, a translator between tech, risk, and business. So that's a big one, right? So I mentioned before, right, that I'm not a hacker. I don't have that deep of a technical knowledge, right? But once again, I'm not an accountant, so I don't have this big business numbers knowledge. But I'm somewhere in the middle, right? So I went to business school. I have a computer science degree. I'm right in the middle of all of that, right? Where I know a lot of the tech stuff. Sure, not as deep as all the experts, but I can hold my own in that room. But also hold my own in a room with board members, CISOs, right? CEOs, CTOs, people who have just the business side of things. They could care less about how deep it goes into the technical side. They just want the big picture business side. So IT audit really falls right in the middle of that. It's a good mix of business and technical. So a source of credible third-party assurance. We've already talked about that a little bit, but once again, a driver of accountability and continuous improvement. Yes?
Could you kind of explain what the word assurance means in this context?
Yeah. So the big thing with assurance is that, how do I put this? So third-party assurance, right? It's so you're buying products from third parties, right? So you're working with third parties, you're bringing in their solutions. You might have contracts with them. You might have things of that nature with these third parties. Assurance is an evaluation that, okay, these are the controls, it's going to be okay, right? Once you evaluate into it, right? And accountability is the other big, A word there. Someone has to be accountable for all that and making sure that it is all operating, right? There has to be somebody who is in control, right? So when we start talking about AI, a lot of the talks today were probably, AI oriented. We are running into clients that are starting to use it more and more in their systems, right? So change control, big thing in IT audit. A lot of the code changes now are written by Claude, are written by Codex, written by all these tools. They're like, okay, so how many of these do people actually have to go in and review? And my argument is most of them, right? You don't want AI reviewing AI and being accountable for AI. It doesn't really make sense, right? Having a person, someone you can tie back to, someone you can slap on the wrist, say, hey, you shouldn't have done that, but you approved it, right? So holding someone accountable, that is not a technology, because that doesn't really hold up in the argument in the end when you just say, hey, I did it. Sorry, right? So accountability is another big one there. So once again, so where does IT audit really sit sort of in the whole big picture? So you're asked to trust an organization with your data. So you as a client, right, you're working with an organization, you want to use their product, their SaaS product, their tool. They say, okay, we have this brilliant tool that can take all your patient data, reformat it in a way that makes sense to you, makes it all pretty, right? Just trust us, we'll take all your data, we'll keep it all secure, it'll all be fine. Your PII, patient information, your defense secrets if you're in the government. But you can't walk in and inspect our systems yourself. Oftentimes that's in contracts, right? You can't come in here and audit us yourself. So how do you actually trust them? And that's where IT audit, third-party assurance comes into place. So it's right in between the organization saying, trust us. We are there independently testing what they're saying in order for stakeholders, customers, regulators, partners, boards, things of that nature to actually trust their organization. And once again, going back to some keywords there, right? The auditor's independence is what is stronger. It makes the claim, builds the trust, and all that. So it's not the organization themselves saying we're perfect. It's actually an outside party, has no association with that organization, saying we checked these controls and we agree that they're perfect, or they're mostly there. Here's some gaps on the report, right? So that the stakeholders can have a good view into that and know what they're getting into in order to sign that contract, right? So the assurance, once again, is that product. All right, so where does it fit in GRC? So you might be familiar with the term GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. And really, it sort of sits across all of them. They tie in at different portions throughout. So we have governance. It's who sets the rules. So going back to the policies, who's writing the policies, who's saying what organization can do, what directions you want to go in, what directions you don't want to go in. Okay, we want to use AI for these use cases. Really stay away from AI with these ones because we don't want to use them there, right? So that's governance. Risk, identifying what can go wrong and what you do about it, right? Determining if you want to go in certain directions based on risk. Okay, that's a really risky venture. We might not want to use AI in this use case, right? We don't want to use it with our patient data, but we could use it in the day-to-day, reading documents or writing documents, things like that. And then compliance, just meeting the obligations, laws, regulations, contracts, standards, things of that nature. So what is the main unit of everything in IT audit? And it really comes down to controls. So going back to sort of the overall flow of it all, right? So if we're talking EU AI Act with the new laws out over in Europe, right? That is a regulation, that is a law. So how do you prove you're meeting that law? Frameworks, so it goes down to frameworks, ISO 42001, some of the new AI frameworks that are out there. Okay, so if I meet this framework, there's a good chance I'm meeting that regulation and that law. Speaking on that note as well, a lot of the state-based laws are actually calling out ISO 42001 as saying, okay, if you have this sort of framework, you're all right with our law, you're meeting our laws, everything is sort of lining up there. So a lot of the new laws that are coming out are trying to attach to these frameworks to give organizations sort of a clear, if you have this, you're good, right? But all the states are moving in different directions, especially here in the US, everyone has a different opinion, regulate, don't regulate, be creative, what should be number one, right? So that's still sort of hashing out here in the States. But after those frameworks, it comes down to controls to meet that framework. So in order to meet this overall framework, here's a list of a bunch of controls you have to meet, which are basically the rules, right? And then how do you prove you meet those controls? Evidence, so those are the pictures, the screenshots, logs, things that we're evaluating on a day-to-day. So that's really the overall high-level flow of how this goes. And then, so the controls break down into design effectiveness, once again, and operating effectiveness. Design, does it set up correctly? Are you calling out everything? The example here, does a policy require access to be removed when someone leaves the organization? I sure hope so, right? You don't want people still having access when they left the company. So that's the design effectiveness, saying, okay, here's this policy, remove access after 12 hours of a person leaving, being terminated, or something like that, right? Operating effectiveness would be, is that actually working? Did your team actually go in there and disable the user accounts after 12 hours or sooner than that person being terminated? So we would sample, okay, 12 people left this year, let's just look at all 12 of them. Did they all get access removed within 12 hours? Yes, good. Okay, was one of them maybe a little later? Okay, we'll write that as a gap, right? But overall, it was operating effective. There was just this one small, gap of, okay, they missed it by an hour for one of them. So that's the difference between design and operating. All right, so a little bit into this presentation, we'll start getting into what are some of the different frameworks based on where your organizations might sit, what industries you're in, things of that nature. But there are 4 domains that sort of spread across all of them. You're going to run into them no matter what, right? So there's access management. Who can get into what? Should they be able to get into what they have access to? Who provisions that? Least privilege, right? So people in HR should not have access to production. Why would they need that, right? MFA, having that added layers of security, and once again, timely removal once people start leaving companies, that you're taking away that access. If someone switches roles within an organization, that you're changing what software they have access to based on their roles. Change management, like I mentioned, across the board, that's every organization is sort of going to have that change management for their products. How changes to systems are requested, tested, approved, and tracked, so nothing slips in unreviewed. So that's the big thing, that 1, you're pushing these changes, but 2, you have all that documentation to back it up. That, okay, this is exactly what we changed, this is who did it, this is who reviewed that person's work, and this is the high-level person who said, okay, here's the stamp, I agree with everything that happened. Once again, accountability on that person who stamped it. So if something fails down the road, they can tie back to those people who changed it, right? And once again, not AI, hopefully. Endpoint security, so across the organization, everybody has laptops, servers, databases, everything of that nature. You got to patch all those. You got to have encryption on all of them. You got to have anti-malware to make sure no viruses are getting on all that stuff. And just overall configurations, how you're hardening laptops, things of that nature. And then lastly, data protection. Almost everything has data running into it nowadays. Safeguarding that data, both in rest and in transit. Once again, going back to encryption, backing up the data. If something were to fail, organizations have to be able to fall back to a certain point in time, like an hour ago, 6 hours ago. To keep that data as close to real time as possible, so they don't lose everything and all their customers are mad. Retention, how long you're keeping it for. Because once again, if you're keeping it for too long, then your customers might get mad if a leak occurs. Like, why do you still have that data from 5 years ago that you shouldn't have anymore? So keeping it for a time frame that makes sense to what industry you're in. And yeah, go ahead.
A question for you about change management.
Yeah.
Clearly, if you have a change management process that expects certain things to happen, you could have did the 10 expected changes happen this year in the form that we expect.
Right.
Obviously, I think that the concern with change management is the changes that you don't know about.
Right.
How do you attempt to gather evidence to see if there's changes that have fallen through that crack, or ones that you haven't created the documents you'd expect to see, or the sign-offs you'd expect to see for a valid change?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of organizations, what we see is they will use like automated logging of some nature to track, everything that's going on in that system. And then from there, as auditors, once we go in, that's sort of our source of truth. Like, okay, here's all this automated list. The system itself recorded this, of these changes that went through. GitHub, maybe, if that's being used in an organization, or down to, the system itself, if we have access to actual system logs, right? So that's sort of our source of truth. From there, as auditors, right, we can't look at 1,000 different changes, in a timely fashion, so we got to take a reasonable sample to make sure everything is, once again, operating as effective. So then we would take a sample of that, and then that's when we would sort of get into that documentation of, okay, did you document all this? So right, it's best practice that organizations know what they're pushing out, know what they're changing in all this, and following those procedures of, okay, here's the paper to back it up, right? Obviously, some slips through the cracks, right? An organization's probably going to be perfect on that front, unless they really nail down that process somehow. But to answer your question, right, they do fall through the cracks sometimes. Sometimes things slip up. Someone didn't review it when they should have. Someone didn't sign off. There's going to be gaps, right? But the overall goal, as long as it's operating effectively, most of what you're doing is following that procedure. Then that's sort of that assurance of, okay, you're doing it for the most part, right?
I have a couple things. One of the things I'd like to add is thinking about, so some change management are not planned.
Right.
It could be emergency change.
Yeah.
For example, you need to do some urgent patching or something.
Yeah.
So you need to, that actually bypass the standard procedure.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's one thing. And the other, that's a follow-up question that about the change management is not all companies are software like IT related companies. Some company has total different functionalities.
Right. Yeah.
For example, one of the companies I work is more automotive engineering.
Yep.
So they don't do much IT stuff. They have
Yeah.
more laborers. But if they want to get like ISO 27001 for certification, for example, do they need to have a change management?
Yeah, so in that aspect, so once again, not every organization is building their own product, building their own platforms, writing thousands of different, code changes, right? They're just using, vendor products, vendor software, things of that nature. And a lot of times that'll just fall into common patches from those vendors themselves, right? That'll be their change management, that, okay, there's a patch, we sort of reviewed it before we pushed it out. We had someone approve it before we pushed it out to the overall organization. Maybe we tested it on a few laptops before we pushed it out company-wide, right? So that would still fall under change management, even if it's not you yourself, right, doing all those changes. It's more of a patch that's pushed out by a vendor. And yeah, to go back to your example of emergency changes, right? Oftentimes we will see that specifically called out in policies, right? So, okay, here's our normal procedure if everything's going normal, right? This is what we follow. And here is what we do if there is an emergency, right? Okay, maybe we don't have everyone signing off, everyone reviewing, all this stuff happening. Maybe we'll push it out and have a review afterwards because, it's after hours. We have to fix this right now or else we're losing everything, right? So it really comes back to these frameworks of what is defined back in your organizational policy. So if you're calling out like, okay, we'll push out a change in emergency and review it within 24 hours after that maybe, or if we're, as long as you're following your own stated policy and the design of that is sort of what is investigated as well when it comes to emergency situations like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you talk about, you said once we go in, are you actually being given access to the CI/CD environment or the cloud environment or something when you're auditing, or is it just like you give it to a senior person who signs off that we did this thing?
Yeah. So when we go in, I probably shouldn't use that wording, right? So we're not actually going into systems. We're giving organizations a list of, okay, this is what we would want to see from your cloud environment, the configurations that are set up, protecting it, things of that nature. And oftentimes they're giving us back screenshots of configurations, or if they don't want to give us screenshots because they don't want us holding on to that type of information, we'll go in with them, we'll view them doing it. We don't really take over and do it ourselves. We have someone walking us through it. We have, we're reading the policies and then we're looking at screenshots and configurations and things like that. So I should change my language and not say we're diving into these systems because we aren't really. It's like the hackers in movies with the hoodies and stuff, things that isn't actually going on. We're not actually doing that yet.
Yeah, just to add to that, usually an auditor will have a data request where it's usually some immutable form. We used to submit like text files and like someone could change those along the way anytime. So they started asking for like PDFs or screenshots. When I was at IBM, I also saw a move to live testing where the auditor will sit there and share out your screen and will say, show me this. We had to do that in some cases where we had a database that contained some data that the auditors were not allowed to see. And they're like, we'd like access to the database, and if we can't give you access to that database, we'd be more than happy to pull what you want to see. So it depends on the audit and the level of access that they need and things like that, so.
Yeah. Yeah, and as common practice, right, as auditors, like if an organization is in these sort of environments where, you know, they shouldn't be sharing everything else, right, we tell them, you know, censor what you need to, right, you know, block out what you need to. We don't need to know everything. Like if you're giving us a population of, you know, stuff that we want to look at, sure, block out what's not needed for that. We'll pick our sample of 10 and then we'll want to see the details on those 10. Like we don't need to see everything, right? So there are, you know, ways to protect organizations that are working with more sensitive data. Like you mentioned, actually screen sharing, or, you know, if, you know, a few years ago, often before COVID, when we were going on site to actually conduct audits, now it's all virtual. It's very rare that an auditor goes on site. More so maybe in the ISOs that you're actually jumping on site there. But if you were on site, you know, it was a lot easier to sort of be like, okay, you can't take any of this here because, you know, we're right over your shoulder watching you look at that screen, right? We're making sure you're not taking anything. Where now that it's more virtual, it's a little harder, but there are still the protections that can take place. All right, so a bunch of different audits for a bunch of different things. So there is no single IT audit, right? So there's a bunch of different frameworks depending on what industry you're in. So SOC 2 is going to be your most basic, what most organizations have. Those are going to be your SaaS products. You know, that is going to be how they prove to customers that they are meeting certain controls. So that's SOC 2 is probably going to be the most common one you see. HITRUST holds a special place in my heart. I did that for 4 years. So that's the healthcare-oriented certification. So it's very robust. We'll get into it. It's a beast to entail. Very expensive for organizations to take on HITRUST as well. But it is becoming more and more standard in the aspect of, if you're in the healthcare industry, a lot of times now it's being written into contracts. If you want to work with us, you have to have HITRUST. So that's a lot of its growth more in the last few years. So there's larger organizations like, you know, UPMC and Mayo Clinic and a lot of these bigger organizations that are saying, okay, if you want to partner with us and work with us, now you got to prove you're, you know, HITRUST compliant and that you're matching our security there. HIPAA, an interesting one, right? So it's a law, not a certification, it's an attestation. So SOC 2 and HIPAA are attestations, and I don't think I have a slide on this, so I'll cover it now. HITRUST, CMMC, and the ISOs are certifications. So what's the difference? Attestation, us as auditors, we're going in saying we're reviewing it against this framework, and we think it's good. We attest to everything here that they're meeting all these things. So it's just a third party signed off on it, that's an attestation. Certification, there's going to be another body involved. So HITRUST, there's an organization called HITRUST. So they are the body, they accredit us, so at Advanced Partners, we're accredited by HITRUST to perform HITRUST audits. So we audit them, still do all the work, still review everything, here are all of our findings, here are all of our gaps, but then we have to pass all that up to HITRUST. They sample some of our work, they say, okay, yep, these, you know, this group we accredited is still doing it the way we expect them to, and then they sign off on it, issue the report, it's HITRUST certified. Same with ISO, there's a big ISO, you know, governs everything from information security and AI to cars to food and how its food is handled, and yeah.
I don't see PCI up there.
PCI is, yeah, another one. Credit card standards, yeah. Yep.
Was another one.
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna just throw it, because I do federal government, so.
Yeah.
We have this 853 risk management framework, RMF, so that's.
Yep, that's not bad.
CMMC is a little bit spun off of that.
Yes, exactly, yep. So it's that on steroids. It's built up into the supply chain of the Department of Defense now. CMMC is, if you haven't seen it already and you're in the defense space, by the end of the year it's going to really take off because there's a lot of deadlines hit in November of organizations need to be CMMC certified now in order to work in the supply chain for the Department of War. So yeah, these are just a few, like we mentioned, PCI does exist, that's for credit cards, so every organization that you're tapping your credit card on, they have to be PCI to make sure that that information isn't going anywhere, they're storing it correctly. So that is another good example there.
Not even just taps. Any place you enter your credit card, like collections agencies, anybody that deals with financial and PII.
Yep, exactly.
Just a quick thing,
Yeah.
I don't see GDPR on here.
That's another one.
You guys-
There are a lot of frameworks. Yeah,
You guys-
GDPR is another one.
Do you guys not do them as a US focused board and they will quit someone from Europe to do it?
No, we also do that as well. That's another one that sort of falls in that attestation category of, okay, we can review against GDPR. There's not a set certification, but we can, take that overall GDPR guidance, take a look at organizations, mostly abroad, and, make sure they're meeting that, or US-based organizations that are also, working, because data's traveling everywhere now, so they have customers over abroad that meet GDPR now, so we are seeing that as well. Last slide, there will be a link to our website. You can see a lot of the other frameworks as well. These are just a few of the high-level ones I wanted to touch on here.
One other question,
Yeah.
that one. There's another A word too that I've heard in the past, assessment. Now maybe assessment doesn't mean anything, maybe it's just people conflating attestation and audit.
Mhm.
How would you characterize assessments? And would they fit into here, or would
Yeah,
they be
yeah,
kind of
so
a Frankenstein's
assessments-
monster?
Yeah, assessments are, I consider it sort of interchangeable with audit, right? So audit and assessment, both of them, it's sort of the aspect of us actually going in and conducting all the work is what I would call the assessment portion, right? So whether we're attesting or certifying, I would say, all of that falls into the sort of assessment audit themes as well. But yeah, that is another word that does, you'd probably hear me if I sat here and talked for a few hours, I would probably interchange those two of assessment audit, right? It all sort of falls back into the same group, yeah.
Yeah, and again, from the federal government perspective, for many years, they had certification and accreditation, and mid-2000s, it was clear, and I really support this, to change the CNA to ANA, meaning assessment and authorization. So a government official, high up, has to, like a CIO, I authorize. But the reason was certifying is almost like a, hey, it's secure, you just put that stamp. So, there was a big shift in terminology. The assessment was the work that, and it's kind of equivalent to auditing. So just terminology history for you.
Yeah. Awesome, so we'll dive into these a little bit. Once again, I don't want to go too deep into them all, but just give you a good idea of why different organizations are going for these different ones. Why are some going for SOC 2 and others are going for ISO, right? So SOC 2, once again, attestation. So we're just signing off that we're attesting that they're meeting these things. It's not certifiable. Once again, from a CPA firm. So the AICPA is going to be that body that accredits us to conduct these SOC audits. So once again, AICPA is sort of that body. We are Advantage Partners, are CPA firms. We have 2 sitting CPAs in our organization. And then based on their training, them having a CPA, they're able to sign off on these. A CPA has to sign off on the final report for a SOC 2. So the AICPA developed the trust service criteria, which falls under security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, privacy. There's all these sort of aspects. The bare minimum of a SOC 2 is security. You're always going to find security in a SOC 2. The availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, privacy are all add-ons, depending what industry you're in, what your customers are asking you for, what they want to make sure is secure, what you're actually doing. But bare minimum security is being tested across every SOC 2. So who needs it? Often, like I said, SaaS providers, cloud platforms, AWS, all of them, they're going to have a SOC report. Most major vendors you work with, they're going to have a SOC report. And any vendor whose customers ask, prove you can be trusted with our data. So going back to the AWS example, right? Anybody working with AWS, they have these giant data centers across the US and the world. Our data is being sent there. Now, prove to us that we can trust that you're storing it securely. So they will have a SOC report with the audit that they went through to say, okay, we were audited by a third party. Here's this piece of paper. You can trust us. They said we are, storing it secure.
So one of your third-party engineers puts up an AWS database that's not secure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how did you and I guess your team feel about companies like Vanta that are like speeding up this process for startups and things like that?
Yeah.
That whole, I hear like an ad for it like all the time.
Yeah, so it is becoming a very saturated market. We are actually partnered with Vanta, funny enough, so we do work with Vanta a lot. But there are more and more every day being spun up of these GRC platforms to automate. You know, you plug in all these tools you're using in your organization, it'll pull all the logs for you, it'll do all these things for you and automate. So, you know, with those tools, you know, it's sort of a pros and cons list, but, you know, oftentimes it is helpful because, you know, it speeds up the audit, right? It is automating everything. There's no real back and forth with the client in that nature of, you know, these emails you're getting all the time, right? It's a lot of, oh, we can dive into your AWS instance ourselves because you hooked it up for us, and now we can see all those logs that it pulled for us. So it minimizes a lot of that. But, you know, depending on who you ask, right, in the field, there's going to be those pros and cons of, yeah, we don't like it as much because, you know, how can we really trust these tools, right? Things like that. But then once again, you know, okay, maybe, you know, it is pulling in a lot more data than a person was going to provide you. Maybe it is giving you better evidence than a person was going to give you, less back and forth, things of that nature. But yeah, there's Manta, there's Strata, there's a bunch of different tools now that are speeding up the compliance and working with organizations.
So that's the main value proposition, is that there was no Vanta, you would have to manually
You would
go back and forth.
manually have to know your environment, which you should know anyway. But then also you would have to go in and pull all the evidence manually from all those systems. Okay, now I gotta go log into AWS, go to these different things I have spun up, download a report, get it back to you, package it up, here you go. Okay, what's my next system? Go over here, sign in, pull it down. So then Vanta and all those different tools are just like, okay, sign into this once, tell us everything that's going on in your organization, so then we can try to pull all that down ourselves and package it for the audit there. So yeah, that's the main thing that's going on in the background there. And then, so for SOC 2, you'll see two different type 1, type 2. Really what that's saying is type 1 is at a point in time. So at this exact moment this audit is happening. Type 2 is controls tested over a period. So at a minimum that'll be 3 months. A lot of big ones are going every year as well. Or that's backwards. At a minimum it'll be every year. A lot of organizations are starting to do it more frequently to prove that, you know, that it's happening more often and they are compliant throughout the whole time, not just once a year. They are meeting those compliance things. But most cases, customers want a type 2. So type 1s are going to be organizations that have never done a SOC before. They're a little scared to get into type 2. They want to get their feet wet, right? They'll go for a type 1. At this point in time, you know, check all these things. Okay, we're good there. Now let's move on to a type 2. So just a little bit of a language difference there. All right, so HITRUST, once again, certifiable framework, harmonizes many standards. So HIPAA, NIST, ISO, PCI. A lot of these standards, I like to call it like a Frankenstein standard HITRUST put together. They took all the best things from all these different things, put it in together into one, tailored it towards the healthcare space, and made the HITRUST CSO. So once again, it's a prescriptive control set assessed by an authorized external auditor. So once again, Advanced Partners, we have been accredited by HITRUST to conduct these audits. So they review our process of auditing all these things, and you know, trust us to conduct these. So who needs it? Healthcare and any organization that wants rigorous, certifiable badge of assurance, right? So HIPAA, once again, is an attestation. If you want a certification of we're meeting HIPAA plus a lot more, they would go for HITRUST rather than HIPAA, because HIPAA does fall into the HITRUST there, and a lot of times organizations prefer HITRUST over HIPAA because, once again, it's covering a lot more aspects of the general security stuff. And yeah, unlike SOC 2, SOC 2 is a little bit more flexible. HITRUST has very defined scores, defined requirements, a much higher bar as well, depending on what level you're going for. So E1 foundational is going to be more basic. effort, where if you go up to an R2, that is going to be, here's 300 different controls you gotta meet, and an evidence list of 500 plus things, and show us all this stuff, right? And I conducted every single level, E1, I1, R2. R2 is a real beast of what it sounds like. E1 is good for getting an organization getting their feet wet. Okay, here's 44 of those controls that you would find on an R2. These are what we call the essential ones. Start here, make sure that the organization has the essential ones down. So it sort of builds from there. E1, I1, R2. The numbers do matter in those. So an E1 is a 1-year certification. So you re-up every year, you get it reconducted. I1, same thing. More controls, but once again, every year you're getting them conducted. R2, 1 million controls, right? But it's evaluated every 2 years. At the 1-year mark, we take a sample of those bunch of controls just to make sure you didn't change anything, you're still meeting them, but a much smaller sample size at the 1-year mark. All right, I'll move fast through HIPAA since I've sort of covered it. Once again, it's a law that turned into an attestation that we can conduct saying you're meeting what the law states, right? Once again, for healthcare providers, clearing houses, business associates, and health fees. This one is interesting though because non-compliance with HIPAA carries, penalties, right? So if you are not meeting HIPAA, I had to watch my words there because I almost said if you are not HIPAA compliant, which doesn't exist, you can't be HIPAA compliant because it's not a certifiable framework, right? So that's sort of where we run into that issue of what word means what then, right? But non-compliance equals penalties when it comes to HIPAA, right? Because it is an actual law.
Just a question about that.
Yeah.
I know that HIPAA has business associates and a business associate agreement,
Yep.
but you're saying that the way that HIPAA and HITRUST work together is that, say, maybe you have signed a BAA with the hospital system or an insurer,
Yep.
they still will not, from a risk standpoint, do business with you, even if they could under federal law,
Right.
because you are not HITRUST certified.
Yep.
They expect you to hit a higher hurdle, basically,
Exactly.
through the
Yep.
certification.
To sort of prove it a step further of how mature your organization's compliance frameworks are. Yep, exactly. All right, so like I mentioned, CMMC. So that's going to be Department of War's program, requiring contractors prove they protect federal contract and controlled unclassified information in CUI. So that's going to be any sort of organization that wants to get government contracts. You now have to be CMMC compliant. You have to go through an audit if you want to get contracts. You can't even be in the portal to win contracts if you don't have the CMMC, right? Or so with the deadline in November. So that is going to be a more federal government type control. Different levels, once again, similar to HITRUST. Level 1, a more basic self-assessment. Level 2 aligns back up to NIST standards, and third-party assessment would be conducted by an organization like mine there. And level 3, which is the big one, the highest level that you can become certified against. And once again, this is working in the contracts. So a lot of organizations won't work with you if you don't have this type of thing. And like I mentioned, you can't even bid on different contracts if you don't have this certification. All right, so the big thing to take away from the ISOs, 27001 is going to be your main information security management system standard. 42001 is your new AI management system standard. The good thing is, so a lot of organizations will start with the information security one because that's been around for a lot longer. It has a lot of the same bare bones, right? So your ISO 27001 will tell you, okay, do a risk assessment, have management sign offs. Management needs to be meeting at these things, right? When it goes to the 42001 and the AI one, it's like, okay, conduct an AI risk assessment. Make sure all these things are happening with AI. So it's the same sort of baseline, just now do it for AI. And there are some additional things, like impact assessments for AI that you're actually conducting impact assessments, things of that nature. But once again, ISO is right there in the name, international, so it travels across borders. So a lot of organizations across the world recognize ISO more so than they would recognize some of the other frameworks. So that's the sort of main aspects there of ISO. But lots of ISO standards. 27701 is going to be the privacy one. And yeah, a lot more are coming out, but those are a lot of big ones. There's some more environmental ones as well that are coming out that we've been seeing organizations get to. So at a high level, what do you need? So if you want to sell software, SOC 2, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a high level list of what you would be going for based on where you are. Operate in healthcare, okay, HIPAA. If you want more, HITRUST. Rigorous certifiable assurance badge, HITRUST. You want to contract with the Department of Defense, CMMC. Globally recognized, ISOs. You're in AI, 42001 specifically. So what does an audit actually look like? So this is sort of the flow it goes into. Number one, you got to scope it off as a whole. What is in scope? What is the architecture that we're evaluating? What exact system are we looking at? What employees? Is it the whole organization? Is it a portion of that organization that we're looking at? All falls into scope. Plan and request. Okay, so now we plan the audit and do that list of all the evidence requests we would want from a client, often called an IRL, that we would ask the client for. Okay, here's a list of everything we want to see from that meeting these controls. Then we move into testing. Okay, we're going to take all the evidence you gave us, we're going to look at all the evidence, mark it up, once again, prove how it's meeting these controls, or if there are gaps, prove how it's not meeting controls. And then report in the end any findings, expectations, and communicate that back up to the stakeholders of the organization. So getting even more detailed, what would my life look like on a weekly basis, right? So when we mentioned walkthroughs, like, so I would be talking to clients saying, okay, show me how you meet this control. Oh, you don't understand what I'm asking for in this evidence request. Here's exactly what I'm asking for, right? So having these walkthroughs, walking the client through the evidence requests and the controls. Reviewing evidence, so opening up all those PDFs, opening up all the Excel documents, opening up all the screenshots, looking at them, marking them up, circling things, marking down gaps of, okay, there wasn't a performance review conducted for 2 of the 15 employees I looked at, marking that down. Writing up the exceptions and gaps like I just mentioned. And then ultimately closing calls, so reporting that back up to the stakeholders at the organization, and then issuing that final report once you communicate back all those findings that you had. And then why it matters, right? So going back to it, audit turns claims into trust, right? It's not just an organization saying they're doing it. Someone else outside the organization came in, tested it, said, yes, they are actually meeting it. 5 things to walk out with. We are going to run perfectly on time. So, if you don't remember anything today, remember some of these things, right? IT audit is independent verification. Everything reduces to controls. Are they designed well, and do they actually operate well? The framework depends on who's asking and why, so what your customers are asking for, what your partners are asking for, and what industry you're in. Auditors don't build controls. They give other reasons to trust them. So we're not in the systems like actually telling organizations these are all the controls you should be meeting, actually designing them. We're going in and just evaluating the controls you set or a framework set. And then the real product is trust, accountability, and resilience. That is in that piece of paper that we did. Yes?
So I have a question.
Yep.
How do you become an auditor?
Yeah. So I, right after college, decided I don't want to be into coding and all this stuff. I have this amazing computer science degree, and I do not like coding. So I decided, you know what else can I do? Because cybersecurity is a very big field, right? It's not all coding. So what else can I do? Oh, there's this whole business side of things I didn't even realize. Let me go get my MBA. Let me go learn business and meet in the middle there and get into IT audit, right? So I will say, right, in my undergrad, I liked the information security policy type courses, how you write policies, how you do governance across an organization. Once again, didn't really like the coding side. I wish someone had this presentation when I was in college because I didn't know this existed until my senior year, probably last semester of undergrad. And I was like, oh, didn't even know IT audit existed. Like, maybe I should look into that, and then went to master's, right? So that's how I personally came into, like people come from different backgrounds, accountants often come in and then learn the tech side of things. Tech people often come in and learn the business accounting side of things, right, and how to audit. So really it really is sort of that middle ground. And then from there you start building up knowledge from the CISA, right, getting your certifications that are audit specific and things of that nature. Yeah.
2 words I often see in these reports are the phrase compensating controls. Are those words that you'd care to give any color about or context about how an IT auditor might use an expression like that to justify or explain something?
Yeah, so compensating controls are, okay, this framework says this thing. As an organization, we evaluated that, decided we didn't want to do that, right? But we are implementing these other controls to make up for it. So that's like the high level of what a compensating control is, right? So, okay, it doesn't make sense for our organization to do exactly to the letter what this is saying. You know, maybe our organization's too big, we can't be looking at all these things, we can't, you know, that all falls into sort of the risk assessment of an organization. Okay, we're willing to take this risk, we're willing to take a gap on this assessment, say, yep, we know we messed up there, we're aware of it, we're not going to improve it, or maybe we will, you know, we're just not there yet. But yeah, compensating controls flow into, okay, we don't do this, but we do this to make up for it, ultimately.
So is that usually signed off on by management? Like if you've got a company that's an automotive one, might not have a large need for change management.
Yep.
Maybe they would describe how they have a system that works for them sufficiently that you'd be writing the narrative on, they'd be signing off on, and you'd still be providing that third-party insurance.
Yeah. And it often ties back into policies and how they write their policies. So in SOC 2s and things like that, you can sort of tailor it a little bit more to, okay, we evaluated it against their policy and how they do it within their organization, and we're attesting to that more so than some other stuff. So there is a little bit of flexibility within SOC 2s and other frameworks to do things exactly like that of, okay, let's drop this, but add these three in to make up for it, to paint the overall picture there, yeah.
So what's the cut point for passing and failing? So when you go for an audit, you find some are, like they made the eligibility, and some they didn't fully provide you the screenshots of the evidences.
Yeah.
So at what point you go, like you, for example, driving test, there's a 10-point cut or something like, do you have something like that?
Yeah, so for the individual control level, like, so once again, if we're testing, okay, if someone was terminated, you gotta remove access, whatever, we'll take 10 employees that were terminated within the last year. It sort of falls into where the majority is. So if 8 of them didn't get access removed, we would say, okay, that's failing, we can't trust that's operating effectively. Or we'll take a larger sample, review, make sure we didn't just get a weird batch, and you know, if it is still failing very often, then we'll say, okay, no, that fails. It's obviously not operating effectively if the majority of it is failing then on a control level. So each framework also goes up to a higher domain level, where, okay, here's the big domain with all these different controls in it. So a control in here could fail, but if you're still meeting the overall domain, okay, you're passing, you know, the framework as a whole, but here's a gap at a control level of, you know, this very specific thing you're failing, but the overall picture, you're basically there, right? You're doing all the other stuff, you're meeting all these other things, and you know, maybe it's a less risky thing, so we can accept that gap and you're meeting that domain. When you get into HITRUST and some of the other frameworks, they have a very spelled out, for an E1 assessment in HITRUST, each domain has to hit an 83 score, and then you get this score by doing all this math. They have a whole rubric I could pull up for you with charts that you go and determine each score on each control. So different frameworks will issue that.
It's like doing your taxes.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, and then CMMC has another scale as well that determines if you're passing or failing. So depends by the framework, but you know, some frameworks have it very spelled out. SOC 2, it's a little bit more, you know, are you meeting the words that are the AICPA spells out in the framework? And if not, you know, constant controls, how you're making up for it, things like that. Okay, based on all that, we determine you're meeting it or not meeting it. Yeah. So it's a little bit more opinionated in a SOC 2 than it would be HITRUST, where it's spelled out, no, you failed that because you got a score of this, right?
Yeah, so I think that's time.
Yeah, any more questions? Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.